I never imagined that a simple disagreement over my backyard fence would lead to me, a black woman and decorated armed police officer, being handcuffed and tossed out of a helicopter by corrupt HOA enforcers who called themselves cops, only for me to flip the script in mid-air because, as it turns out, survival training means you don't always need a parachute to come out on top, and watch them crash and burn in the process. It all started in the quiet suburbs of Oak Ridge Estates, a gated community where the homes were pristine, the lawns manicured to perfection, and the HOA ruled with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove of neighborhood newsletters and passive-aggressive fines. I'd moved there 2 years ago after a long career in law enforcement, seeking some peace after years of high-stakes patrols and undercover ops. My name's Detective Aisha Thompson, and at 42, I was finally settling into what I thought would be a drama-free life. My house was modest by community standards, a cozy 2-story with a small garden where I grew herbs and vegetables, a far cry from the opulent mansions some of my neighbors flaunted. But peace? That was an illusion shattered the day Karen Hargrove set her sights on me. Karen was the HOA president, a woman in her late 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair, a wardrobe of pastel cardigans, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She patrolled the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff, clipboard in hand, noting every infraction from overgrown hedges to unauthorized holiday lights. Everyone whispered about her, how she'd fined old Mr. Jenkins into bankruptcy over his bird feeders, or how she'd rallied the board to evict a young family for painting their door the wrong shade of blue. But I didn't pay her much mind at first. I kept my property spotless, paid my dues on time, and even volunteered for the community watch to show I was a team player. That changed when I decided to install a small privacy fence around my backyard. It was nothing fancy, just wooden panels to shield my garden from prying eyes and give me a space to unwind after shifts. I'd checked the HOA bylaws meticulously. Fences under 6 feet were allowed with board approval, which I applied for weeks in advance. The response came back denied, citing some vague clause about aesthetic uniformity. I appealed, attaching photos and explanations, but Karen shot it down personally, claiming it would disrupt the visual flow of the neighborhood. Frustrated but determined, I went ahead anyway. After all, the bylaws had loopholes, and I'd consulted a lawyer friend who assured me it was within bounds if I kept it low-key. Big mistake! The morning after I finished installing it, I woke to the sound of hammering outside my window. Peeking through the curtains, I saw Karen directing 2 burly men in uniforms marked Oak Ridge Security, the HOA's private cops, a team of ex-military types hired to enforce rules with more muscle than necessary. They were tearing down my fence, plank by plank, while Karen stood there with her arms crossed, a triumphant smirk on her face. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, storming out in my robe. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh sawdust and morning dew, but my blood was boiling. Karen turned to me slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Ms. Thompson, this structure violates Section 4.2 of our covenants. We've issued multiple warnings." "Warnings? I never got any warnings." "I appealed the denial, and this is legal," I protested, pulling out my phone to record the scene. One of the security guys, a stocky man with a buzz cut named Rick, stepped forward menacingly. "Ma'am, step back. This is HOA property now." "HOA property? This is my backyard," I retorted, my voice steady from years of de-escalating tense situations on the job. But Karen wasn't having it. She waved a stack of papers. "You've been non-compliant. Fines will be assessed, and if you interfere, we'll have to involve authorities." I laughed bitterly. "You mean real authorities, or your rent-a-cops here?" That struck a nerve. Karen's face flushed red, and she whispered something to Rick. He nodded, and before I knew it, the other guard, a lanky guy called Mike, grabbed my arm. "Hey, get off me!" I yanked away, but they were persistent. It escalated quickly, me demanding they leave, them insisting on securing the premises. Neighbors started peeking out their windows, but no one intervened. Karen's reign of terror had them all cowed. By the end of it, my fence was in splinters on the curb, and I had a $500 fine slapped on my door. That was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Karen ramped up her campaign. My mailbox overflowed with citations. For my car parked too close to the curb. For leaves from my tree littering the sidewalk. Even for my recycling bin being out a day early. Each fine was petty, but they added up, $50 here, $100 there, chipping away at my savings. I tried reasoning with the board at the next meeting, presenting my case calmly, but Karen dominated the room, twisting facts and painting me as a troublemaker. "Ms. Thompson clearly doesn't respect our community's values," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We must maintain standards for everyone's benefit." The other members nodded like puppets, and my appeals were denied. I started documenting everything, photos, emails, even installing security cameras around my house. As a cop, I knew the importance of evidence, but Karen was sneaky. She'd show up unannounced, peering into my windows or inspecting my yard when I was at work. One evening I came home to find my garden trampled, my tomato plants uprooted. No proof it was her, but the smug note left on my door, "Please maintain your property," reeked of her handiwork. I confronted her at her house, a sprawling McMansion with fountains and topiaries. "This has to stop, Karen. You're harassing me." She feigned innocence from her porch, sipping tea. "Harassing? I'm just doing my duty. If you can't follow rules, maybe this isn't the place for you." Her words carried an undercurrent of something darker, a hint of prejudice that I'd felt before but couldn't pin down. Being the only black homeowner in the cul-de-sac, I'd noticed the sidelong glances, the extra scrutiny, but I chalked it up to paranoia. Now it felt deliberate. I reported her to the city, but the HOA was private, and without hard evidence of illegal activity, they couldn't intervene. My lawyer friend advised patience. "Build your case, Aisha. These types always overstep." He was right. The escalation came when Karen started involving actual law enforcement, or at least her version of it. Oak Ridge had ties to a local private aviation club. The community backed onto a small airfield used for scenic tours and executive transport. Karen's husband was on the board there, and rumor had it she pulled strings for enforcement flights to survey properties from above, spotting violations like unapproved sheds or pools. One afternoon, while I was in my living room reviewing case files from work, a pounding shook my front door. I opened it to find Rick and Mike, flanked by two actual police officers I didn't recognize, probably from a neighboring precinct, given their unfamiliar badges. Karen stood behind them, arms folded. "Aisha Thompson, you're under arrest for trespassing and property damage," one cop announced, flashing a warrant that looked suspiciously fresh. "Trespassing? On my own land?" I demanded, heart racing but keeping my cool. "This is a mistake." But they weren't listening. Before I could react, they twisted my arms behind my back, slapping on handcuffs that bit into my wrists. The metallic click echoed in my ears, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times from the other side. Karen watched with glee. "See? Non-compliance has consequences." As they dragged me to a waiting van, I caught snippets of conversation, something about taking her for a ride and showing her the view. The van sped off, not to the station, but to the airfield. My mind raced. This wasn't standard procedure. I tested the cuffs, standard issue, but I'd been trained to escape them if needed. At the airfield, they bundled me into a waiting helicopter, the rotors whirring loudly, drowning out my protests. "What's this about?" I shouted over the noise. Rick leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "Karen's orders. Time to see the bigger picture." The cops exchanged uneasy glances but followed along, perhaps bought off or intimidated. As we lifted off, the ground falling away, Karen's voice crackled over the radio. "Make sure she understands the rules. from up high. My stomach dropped as the helicopter climbed higher, the suburbs shrinking below. Handcuffed in the back, I realized with horror what was coming. Rick grinned maniacally, sliding open the door. The wind whipped through, chilling my skin. "End of the line, troublemaker." He grabbed my shoulders, pushing me toward the edge. The world tilted, and in that moment of sheer terror, as my feet dangled over nothingness, I knew they'd crossed the ultimate line. This wasn't enforcement. This was attempted murder. My heart pounded as the wind roared through the open helicopter door, my feet dangling over the void, the suburban patchwork of Oak Ridge estates spinning below like a cruel kaleidoscope. Rick's grip on my shoulders tightened, his sneer visible even in the dim cabin light. But years of training as a police officer kicked in. Panic wasn't an option. I'd been in worse spots. Undercover stings, high-speed chases, even a hostage standoff, where I disarmed a gunman with nothing but words and a steady hand. This was just another crisis, and I wasn't about to let Karen Hargrove and her goons win. The handcuffs bit into my wrists, but I'd practiced escapes in the academy. Standard cuffs like these had a weak point if you knew the trick. As Rick shoved me closer to the edge, yelling over the rotors about teaching me a lesson, I focused on the feel of the metal, subtly twisting my thumb to press against the locking mechanism. The two actual cops in the front seats looked uneasy, their heads turning slightly as if questioning this insanity. But they didn't intervene, either complicit or too scared of Karen's influence. My lawyer's words echoed in my mind. They always overstep. This was it, the overstep I needed. With a sharp click, one cuff loosened just enough to give me leverage. I didn't have a parachute, but I had something better. Training, grit, and a plan forming faster than the ground rushing below. I slumped my shoulders, feigning surrender to throw Rick off guard, then drove my elbow hard into his gut. He grunted, loosening his hold, and I spun, using my cuffed hands to grab the doorframe for stability. The helicopter wobbled as Mike lunged at me, but I ducked, letting his momentum carry him forward into Rick. Chaos erupted in the cramped cabin. The pilot shouted, "What the hell's going on back there?" As I scrambled to the opposite side, my eyes scanning for anything useful. There, strapped to the wall, was an emergency kit, standard for aviation, and likely containing a flare gun. I'd seen them in training. They weren't lethal, but they'd make a hell of a distraction. With one hand free, I yanked the kit open, grabbing the flare gun as Rick recovered, charging at me again. I aimed at the open door and fired. A blazing red streak shot out, lighting up the night sky and signaling anyone below that something was seriously wrong. The cops up front panicked, one yelling into the radio, "We've got a situation!" Karen's voice crackled back, furious. "Handle it now!" But I wasn't done. I used the moment of confusion to fully slip the cuffs, my wrists raw but functional. Mike grabbed for me, but I sidestepped, slamming the flare gun's handle into his temple. Not enough to kill, but enough to stun. He crumpled, and I turned to Rick, who hesitated, clearly not expecting resistance from a troublemaker homeowner. "You're done," I hissed, channeling every ounce of authority I'd earned in my badge. The pilot, now spooked, started descending, shouting about returning to the airfield. I didn't trust them to land safely, not with Karen pulling strings, so I kept moving, grabbing a spare headset from the cabin floor to listen in. Sure enough, Karen was barking orders. "Take her out of town! Ditch her somewhere remote!" That was my proof. She'd just admitted to kidnapping and intent to harm, all over an open channel. I hit the transmit button, my voice calm but lethal. "This is Detective Aisha Thompson, badge number 47219. You're all under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy. This is being recorded." The cops froze, exchanging glances. They knew the game was up. No officer wants to be caught on the wrong side of a recorded confession. The helicopter landed hard at the airfield, the rotors slowing as I kept the flare gun trained on Rick and Mike, who were now more subdued. realizing they'd been played. The real cops, looking shaken, didn't resist as I ordered them to cuff themselves to the seats. I stepped out onto the tarmac, the cool night air hitting my face, and saw flashing lights in the distance. Real police, not Karen's puppets, likely alerted by the flare. My phone, miraculously still in my pocket, had been recording audio the whole time, a habit from my undercover days. I uploaded the file to a secure cloud server as I waited, knowing Karen's voice ordering my disposal was gold. When the squad cars arrived, I flashed my badge, explained the situation, and played the recording. The officers, ones I recognized from my precinct, were horrified. "We'll take it from here, Detective," one said, cuffing Rick and Mike as they protested weakly about just following orders. Karen's downfall came swiftly. The recording, combined with my security camera footage from weeks of her harassment, was enough for a warrant. I wasn't there when they arrested her at her McMansion, but I heard she screamed about her rights as they hauled her away, her pastel cardigan askew. The charges piled up: conspiracy, kidnapping, abuse of power, even fraud for misusing HOA funds to pay her security team. The aviation club was investigated too. Their licenses revoked after it came out they'd let Karen use their helicopters for her vendettas. My lawyer friend helped me sue the HOA for damages, citing their complicity in Karen's actions. The board, desperate to avoid more scandal, settled quickly, covering my legal fees and fines, plus a hefty sum that let me rebuild my fence, taller this time, with full approval. Oak Ridge Estates elected a new president, a quiet retiree who promised transparency and fairness. My neighbors, once too scared to speak up, started nodding to me respectfully, some even apologizing for staying silent. I didn't hold grudges. I'd won, and that was enough. As I sat in my garden, sipping coffee amid my thriving tomato plants, I felt the peace I'd moved here for, earned through my own fight. The sky was clear, no helicopters in sight, just the hum of a neighborhood learning to breathe again. What would you have done? Share your own HOA stories in the comments below.